Hey y'all, grown black folks talk. How to build a better network around yourself so that you do have people that you can go and have them on a need to know basis. I mentioned in my last video that it's very, very important for you to be able to have wise counsel, to have people that you can let know what's going on, that you have people that you can get advice, validation, mentorship, comfort, coddling, because sometimes things are going to go wrong. And sometimes you just do need to be cared for when things really go wrong. But you want the right people to have that kind of information about your life, not everybody. Well, how do you do this if regular social media isn't it? If everybody out here can't actually be trusted, now what? There are two main steps and some nuances between them. The first step has to do with building up your skills, your gifts, and your talents to the point that you are wanted in the company of people that already have that kind of proficiency. That's the easier part, actually. And I'll come to why we don't think it's easy in a moment. The second part is being able to work within the systems that people who are established already have set up. And if there is any particular thing that we struggle with, it's actually been noted by researchers about Africans and African Americans. Our genius is the greatest in the world, but we're living in a world that operates by systems. And if we could ever combine that, there's no limit to how much prosperity we could enjoy. But that does seem to be the hang up point. Beyond racism, which is important, but this is also where sometimes we kind of get hung up. And I'll talk about why that is. But in order to have these networks, you have to learn how to work with certain things. We get real mad about the system and the man. And because we have this orientation, sometimes we overlook some things. And I'll talk about how we get around that today. Let's just start with the first part. Many of us as African Americans are in positions where we have to survive from day to day. But most of you have something that you're really good at. If you stop and think about it, it may have been something you were discouraged from doing as a child because people didn't think it was going to make you any money and they wanted you to follow a more prescribed path. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes life circumstances just hand something to you, and nobody has time. You grow up in a certain circumstance, you don't have time to develop a particular gift. The community doesn't have sufficient depth to do that. So sometimes these things are pressed down and repressed. And for some people, this seems to be the hardest part. Finding time, finding space, finding healing so you can get in touch with what is unique to you. One of the best YouTube creators that actually talks about this is Mr. Tony Gaskins, who has a channel. And he does a bunch of videos about finding your gifts and investing yourself. A lot of videos for 2022 about this. I'm not going to cover how he covers it, but the point here is that God gave you something that was meant to sustain you in this world. It may or may not be your job. Now, another good content creator, I talk about her often, Stephanie Perry and the women that she rolls with, Adalia Borshade, Sheeta's on the Loose, and several others. Alicia Renice, the artist, is another one who talks a lot about tapping into the things that you have been given that are unique to you. And these things are able to give you a living once you get into the right networks and you have time. This doesn't mean you get to quit your job necessarily. Although if you watch Stephanie Perry, you go through her channel, location independent work for Black women, you might not be able to do it entirely, but breaking your work life so that you can have time to discover your gifts and talents is possible. And in all fairness, this also works for Black men as well. It's just a somewhat longer path because we talked about some of the things going on with Black men, whereby people outside the community are kind of giving more reasons behind racism to give a side eye, but it still can be done. It just takes more perseverance. Nobody can really stop you from developing your gift. The majority of Black businesses are still owned by Black men. And it's because these men have decided that they're going to do what they have to do to live their dream. And it's not all rappers either. The diversity of Black business, go look at that. There's still a majority of Black businesses still owned by Black men who have gotten in contact with what it is that they do. And the ones that have the most employers are actually still run by Black men. So there are definitely for you gentlemen who are listening to me, there are definitely opportunities. And then of course, if you really are someone who is a very skilled salaried employee, making sure you get your trainings and updating your gifts to the company that you're with, your skill with the company that you're with, and the industry that you're with will help you, whether you stay in that particular place of employment or somewhere else. Most people are earned income. So in that sense, and some people are earning income doing something that they love. So whatever it is, make yourself more valuable to whatever networks you want to be part of by really developing your skills and your talents. Now, that's part one. Now that you finally have discovered the freedom of what it is that you're doing and what you're best at, and now that you have all this freedom, now I have to tell you to go back and be able to systematize that. And this is where, especially if people come out of backgrounds where they were not able to do this for a long time, and then you've gotten the freedom of being able to really operate in your gift, being told to systematize it is a problem. It can feel similar to what you just escaped from, having to be in systems that kept you from developing your gift. Here's the thing about it. You're watching me on YouTube. YouTube runs by a series of algorithms, and so is the computer or mobile phone you are watching it with. And algorithms interacting with a number of inputs and outputs. An algorithm is a long system that really defines how something will operate. It cannot actually improvise in the way the human mind can, but it is programmed to have a lot of different things to do given kinds of input that it receives. But if it receives one outside that programming, the system will crash. It cannot improvise a solution the way the human brain can. But you live in a world that is highly systematized. Nor did this start recently. Ever since the assembly line came along, mechanization and automation, ever since robot assisted this and that became an issue. Now we have artificial intelligence coming down the pike. So a lot of things are going to go down to systems that involve coding and building algorithms to run things. What does this mean for you? You may not have anything to do with coding, but the point is you're working in a world where the networks you enter have systems that allow them to function. A business is a system. It's a system that involves not just the people who do the work every day, but it involves the raw materials. It involves the people that process those raw materials and get them ready for the market. It involves advertising. It involves marketing. It involves distribution. And it involves wholesale and retail. It's a system. So you have to learn how to operate in the systems that your network operates in, and you have to be able to do it efficiently. If we're talking about a personal circle, you have to be able to operate within the play well with others. Learn what the expectations are and how to play well with others. I saw something today. I'm not going to mention where it was, but I noticed a very generous opportunity being extended to people today. And I noticed they didn't do really well in how they handled it because systems thinking is not there. Systems thinking requires you not only thinking about what's best for yourself, but also everybody who's involved with you and what you're doing, everybody who's in your network. What do we do that we can be sure will bring the most benefit? So we know we bring value of our talent to the table. Now, how do we best use this talent within the network to benefit the people here? And how do we do it efficiently? This involves systems thinking. Nope, nope, wasn't there. And as I watched this incident occur, I thought to myself, let's say these individuals get to the tables that they say they want to go to someday. They will not be invited back. It's not that they're not brilliant. It's not that they're not skilled. They don't understand the system that they're working with. They don't understand the expectations and the rules for best practices. It's kind of like in the old days, people knew whether you had old money or new money because you had a certain type of manners. If you were old money, if you were old nobility, because old nobles were not interested in these new money people marrying into their families because they had enough money to do it. So they made up all these different rules and manners. It is incredibly classist and elitist the way it was applied, but every trade Every skill, its practitioners have their own systems of operation and the way that they prefer to do business. You can be very subtly vetted by being invited somewhere and people notice, have you studied enough to know how to read the room and play well with others? Let me also say this. As Black people, we understand law enforcement as direct, hands-on, and often brutal involvement. Anybody who watched the last 9 minutes 29 seconds of George Floyd's life, or is old enough to remember Rodney King, or is old enough to remember Jim Crow, does not have any problem, or just lives in the Black community and see how the police behave from day to day. Sometimes we understand law enforcement as very direct and brutal intrusion. There are people in the world who do not handle it this way. What they do is, yes, they profile. That's correct. You know, the assumption is you're Black, so you don't belong there. So they do some racial profiling. But also, there's also just, we'll invite this person in and we will see if they have done enough research to know how to handle the privilege. And if you don't, you just don't get invited back. You're not a good fit. And so the way people enforce order is just to close doors on you. And sometimes you will not even know that that is happening. I watched, like I said, a group of very brilliant people. And when the door gets closed on them, they're not going to necessarily understand why that happened. Some very brilliant people today. And I see this quite often. And I need to say, as a Black woman who knows that many of my sisters are wanting to join circles of hypergamy, this is something that you really need to pay attention to. You need to pay attention to the places where you want to go. Do you know how to be welcome and stay welcome there? That's important. Whoever you are in the Black community, if you're trying to move up in the world and get to a better network, there was a gentleman who passed away a month ago Sunday, who put out a whole list of how to be a high value man, Mr. Kevin Samuels. And at the bottom of that list, because Mr. Attorney Dennis Burling shared it, was the value of your network. Even a stop clock is right twice a day. But you have to know what are the rules of the network, and you have to follow them. What are the expectations? And you have to follow them. No matter how skilled and talented you think you are, even the manosphere understands this. It applies to everyone. So if you want to have a better web network, get good enough at what you do so you can offer value to a particular network of people who are doing what it is. And that's a struggle by itself in a workaday world, to have time to really develop yourself. That can take a long time. And then just as soon as you get into the freedom of really being able to lean into your gifts, then we got to hit you with systems thinking. You got to know what the expectations are of the people that you're going to be around, the industry that you're going to be in. And then you have to follow them so that you are allowed to stay. Because no matter how talented you are, you have to be able to play well with others. And there are certain expectations that go with that. And oftentimes, when it comes to working with money and opportunity, you have to work within a particular system. I do a lot of creative work. I have some flexibility, but I build systems for myself to hit certain things at certain times of day, because not always YouTube, but you notice most YouTube videos come out at particular times of day. There's actually studies about when should you do a YouTube post, when should you do a Facebook post, when should you do a Twitter post. Now, YouTube is actually not as strict as some others, so it's not as big a deal, but everything I produce, and I'm producing on 1, 2, 3 platforms right now. All of them have best practices. So even though no one has said to me, do it this way, I systematize myself to make sure I can maximize what it is that I'm doing. And I notice, as creative as I am, the more that I get involved in working with how things work, the more prosperous I become. That's a thought. I just offer that to you. Develop yourself, your skills and talents, so you can be with people who see the value that you bring to the table, but also recognize when you get to that table, learn what it takes to be there. No matter how gifted you are, you're not going to be able to stay unless you can deal with the expectations when you get there. There's a price for having a network. You have to be accountable to yourself and to the network. Just a thought. How to build a better network. Now you know. Get crack-a-lacking. All right. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.